Some cars make you smile, some make you dream, and some make you wonder if the designers were actually serious. These are the mechanical blunders, styling disasters, and head-scratching creations that push stupidity to a whole new level. They're so over-the-top ridiculous, you won't believe they actually existed. But they did, and we've got the proof. Today, we present the 12 super stupidest cars you won't believe these. Wild mistakes, insane ideas, and automotive insanity in its purest form. Watch till the end, and don't forget to subscribe. The 1934 Dymaxion car was one of those creations that could only have come from a mind like Buckminster Fuller's, a visionary inventor, architect, and futurist who believed that design could reshape the way humanity lived and moved. It was not just a car to him, but part of his grand vision for efficient, sustainable, and aerodynamic transportation that could someday transform cities. The Dymaxion, whose name was a combination of dynamic, maximum, and tension, embodied the utopian optimism of early 20th century futurism. A machine meant to be radically different from anything else on the road. And different it was in every possible way. The Dymaxion was teardrop-shaped, a form Fuller believed to be the most aerodynamically efficient, inspired by aircraft fuselages rather than contemporary automobiles. Measuring an incredible 20 feet in length, yet only 6 feet wide, it had proportions that made a 1934 Cadillac look like a compact coupe. Its body tapered dramatically toward the rear, culminating in a single third wheel. Yes, this was a three-wheeled car, which handled all the steering. Unlike a conventional front steering layout, the Dymaxion's front axle was fixed, while the rear wheel pivoted to direct the car. The idea was that this setup would allow for extremely tight turns and greater maneuverability in traffic. In practice, it was a nerve-wracking experience akin to piloting a runaway shopping cart at highway speeds. The Dymaxion's construction reflected Fuller's obsession with lightweight efficiency. The chassis was built from lightweight steel tubing, the body was made of aluminum and plywood, and its drivetrain came from a 1933 Ford flathead V8. Fuller claimed the Dymaxion could cruise comfortably at 55 to 60 miles per hour and, in theory, reach a blistering 120 miles per hour thanks to its streamlined shape, an extraordinary figure for the early 1930s. It was also meant to carry up to 11 passengers, making it a sort of aerodynamic bus for the future. Fuel efficiency was reportedly excellent for its size, with Fuller touting figures of over 30 miles per gallon in an era when most cars struggled to hit 15 mpg. Unfortunately, the real-world experience of driving the Dymaxion was far less futuristic and far more terrifying. The rear steering design meant that any sudden input at speed could cause a dramatic fishtailing effect, and under certain conditions, the car could pivot into a spin or even tip over if cornered too aggressively. The massive length made it unwieldy in tight spaces. A U-turn required as much planning as docking an ocean liner. And crosswinds could push the lightweight, high-sided body around with ease. Its one rear wheel not only controlled direction but also bore the burden of stability, meaning that on uneven roads, the Dymaxion often felt like it was balancing on the edge of chaos. The most damaging blow to its reputation came during the 1933 Chicago World's Fair, when one of the prototype Dymaxions was involved in a fatal accident. A collision with another vehicle caused it to roll over, killing the driver and injuring passengers. Although the crash was reportedly due to another driver's error, the Dymaxion's unusual handling and tendency to flip became infamous overnight. Public perception shifted from curiosity to skepticism, and potential backers began to distance themselves from Fuller's project. Still, Fuller was undeterred, insisting that the Dymaxion was simply ahead of its time and that its instability issues could be engineered out with further refinement. He envisioned a future where his teardrop cars would be capable of both driving and low-altitude flight, using a ducted fan propulsion system, a precursor to his later experiments with flying cars. Sadly, no investors were willing to bankroll such ambitious dreams after the bad press, and only 3 Dymaxion cars were ever built. Those few who drove the Dymaxion never forgot it. Accounts ranged from fascination to outright fear. Some praised its smooth ride at moderate speeds and its ability to carry so many passengers in relative comfort. Others swore never to get behind its wheel again, claiming that every turn felt like it might be their last. The joke among those who encountered it was that the Dymaxion wasn't a car ahead of its time, it was a hearse ahead of its first customer. Today, the Dymaxion is seen as both a cautionary tale and a symbol of boundless design ambition. A handful of replicas exist in museums where their otherworldly shapes still draw crowds. It's remembered not as a failed car in the traditional sense, but as a rolling experiment, one that dared to question every assumption about automotive design, even if its answers turned out to be impractical or downright dangerous. In many ways, it encapsulated Fuller's genius and his flaws. Brilliant in concept, flawed in execution, and unforgettable in appearance. If you want, I can also give you the extended backstory of Fuller's personal obsession with making the Dymaxion double as an aircraft, because that part of its history is even stranger than the driving experience.
The 1949 Playboy convertible is one of those obscure post-war oddities that has almost nothing to do with the Hugh Hefner empire, yet has spent its entire existence overshadowed by a name that instantly triggers the wrong mental image. Long before the first glossy magazine hit the stands, a small group of Buffalo, New York entrepreneurs decided to jump into the booming post-war automotive market with a car they thought would bridge the gap between Spartan economy cars and flashy, impractical convertibles. Their solution was bold for the time, a small, stylish convertible with the added practicality of a retractable hardtop. In concept, it sounded like the kind of clever, forward-thinking idea that could put a tiny company on the map. In execution, it was more like a case study in why being first to innovate doesn't always mean you'll win. The idea came from Louis Horwitz, Norman Richardson, and Charlie Thomas, who founded the Playboy Motor Car Corporation in 1947. The post-war American car market was ravenous. Production had been halted for the war effort, and the average car on the road was nearly a decade old. Every startup thought they had a chance to grab a slice of the market, especially if they could offer something the Big Three didn't. The Playboy convertible's big hook was its powered retractable hardtop, a feature no mass-produced American car had yet offered. It was compact, folding neatly into the trunk at the touch of a switch, giving drivers both coupe security and open-air freedom. In 1949, this was a jaw-dropping piece of engineering. It would take Ford another 7 years to introduce a similar feature in the 1957 Skyliner, and even then, it was hailed as cutting edge. But that folding top came with a big, heavy problem. The mechanism and reinforced roof structure added considerable weight to what was supposed to be a nimble little two-door runabout. The car's design also wasn't exactly featherlight to begin with. Its steel body sat on a simple ladder frame, and under the hood was a 2.0-liter, four-cylinder engine making a meager 40 horsepower. This might have been adequate in a stripped-down pre-war economy car, but once you factored in the Playboy's fancy roof, full trim, and amenities aimed at comfort, the engine was hopelessly outmatched. Acceleration was leisurely to the point of comedy. 0 to 60 miles an hour wasn't so much a sprint as an afternoon outing. Owners joked that trying to pass another car required either a very long straightaway or divine intervention. More than one road tester remarked that it moved with all the enthusiasm of a sunbathing turtle, which was both cruel and accurate. Worse still, the Playboy convertible was priced ambitiously. At around $1,385, it was more expensive than a brand new Ford or Chevrolet, both of which offered more power, more space, and the reassurance of a nationwide service network. The Playboy's interior was comfortable for two, but cramped in the back. And while the styling was pleasant in a modest, almost European way, it lacked the chrome-heavy flash that post-war buyers craved. Its small size and conservative looks made it appear more like an upscale appliance than an object of desire. Ironic, given the name. The company's founders optimistically planned to build 100,000 cars a year, but reality was cruel. Financing dried up quickly once it became clear that mass production would require far more investment than their shoestring operation could handle. They managed to build just 97 cars before the doors closed in 1951. Those who had bought one suddenly owned a car with no part supply, no dealer network, and almost no resale value. Owners either became their own mechanics or quietly moved the little convertible to the back of the garage. Over the decades, the handful of surviving Playboy convertibles have become a curiosity at car shows, not because they were great cars, but because they're such an odd intersection of ambition and miscalculation. Retractable hardtops would eventually become a luxury feature in the automotive world, but the Playboy Motor Car Corporation was too far ahead of its time and far too underpowered to survive long enough to be recognized as a pioneer. Collectors today appreciate them as rare artifacts from that post-war moment when hundreds of little companies thought they could take on Detroit, only to be reminded that ideas alone don't keep you in business. One surviving owner in the 1970s summed it up perfectly. "It was the slowest car I ever loved. You couldn't get anywhere in a hurry, but when you parked it and put the top down, people would gather around and ask what it was. I told them it was a Playboy, and they never believed me." If you want, I can also expand on the bizarre marketing campaign they tried to run in Buffalo, which ended up making the car sound like a gimmick rather than a serious vehicle. That's a story in itself.
The 1958 Ford Edsel Corsair has become one of the most enduring cautionary tales in American automotive history, not because it was truly the worst car ever made, but because it managed to fail on such a colossal scale with such bizarre design decisions that it left a permanent scar on Ford's reputation. When it debuted in the fall of 1957, the Edsel was supposed to be the jewel in Ford's expanding crown, a new marquee positioned between Ford and Mercury, aimed squarely at the booming mid-priced market segment that had made Buick, Oldsmobile, and Dodge such moneymakers. The name was chosen to honor Edsel Ford, Henry Ford's only son, but by the time the Corsair rolled into showrooms, that name would instead be synonymous with corporate disaster. The Edsel's launch was one of the most hyped in history. Ford spent years and millions of dollars conducting market research, creating new assembly processes, and crafting an enormous ad campaign that promised America something revolutionary. By the time the covers came off, the public had been primed for a car that would change the game. What they got was, well, something else entirely. The Corsair, one of the upper-tier Edsel models, was built on the Mercury platform and priced in Buick territory, but the most striking feature was its vertical, horse-collar grille. Officially, designers claimed the upright oval was meant to evoke classic pre-war styling and make the Edsel instantly recognizable from a mile away. In practice, it looked like either a toilet seat, a whale sucking in krill, or, as one critic cruelly put it, an Oldsmobile sucking a lemon. The grille alone became the visual shorthand for the car's failure, and even people who had never seen an Edsel in person knew what it looked like. But the styling oddities didn't end there. The Corsair's front bumper dipped awkwardly in the center to frame that giant oval. The taillights looked like boomerangs pointing the wrong way, and the instrument cluster was loaded with flashy but impractical ideas. Chief among them was the TeleTouch push-button transmission control mounted in the steering wheel hub. Instead of a conventional column shifter, you selected your gear by pressing one of 5 buttons where the horn would normally be. It was a novel idea until it broke, which it often did. Dust, moisture, or just bad wiring could disable it, leaving owners stranded or stuck in the wrong gear. Mechanics cursed it, owners regretted it, and Ford's warranty department hemorrhaged cash trying to keep them working. Quality control was another Edsel's Achilles heel. The car was assembled in multiple plants, sometimes on the same lines as regular Fords and Mercurys, which meant parts and trim often didn't line up properly. Chrome was pitted, paint mismatched, and interior fittings loose, all unforgivable sins in a car priced above a fully loaded Ford Fairlane. Worse still, the economy had just dipped into recession, and buyers in the mid-priced market were suddenly looking down, not up, for their next purchase. By the time a would-be Edsel buyer compared the car to a Chevrolet Impala or a Mercury Monterey, the Edsel's odd looks, finicky gadgets, and higher price tag pushed them toward the competition. Ford had planned to sell 200,000 Edsels in the first year. They sold barely a quarter of that, and even those sales were padded with heavily discounted cars that dealers couldn't move. The Corsair, despite being one of the more expensive and better equipped models, was dead weight on showroom floors. Ford pulled the plug on the entire Edsel line by the end of 1959, having lost an estimated $250 million, an astronomical figure in the late 1950s, equivalent to billions today. Yet for all its infamy, the Corsair wasn't truly a terrible car to drive. Underneath the polarizing sheet metal and gadgetry, it rode like a Mercury, with a big 410 cubic inch V8 that offered smooth, effortless cruising power. On the open road, it was as competent as any full-size American car of its day. The problem was that no one could get past its face, and the fact that it was marketed as a revolution, but delivered mostly gimmicks and quirks. One original Corsair owner, interviewed in the 1980s, put it this way: "It wasn't a bad car, it was just a bad idea. Every time I parked it, somebody would make a joke about the grille. After a while, you get tired of explaining that no, it's not supposed to look like that. I sold it after 2 years, and I swear, I could still hear people laughing when it drove away." Today, surviving Corsairs draw big crowds at shows, not because they're beloved classics, but because they're fascinating artifacts of a time when Detroit thought it could market anything into success. It's proof that even a car with solid mechanical bones can become a legend for all the wrong reasons. If you like, I can also go into the bizarre launch day marketing event Ford staged for the Edsel that made the failure even worse. It's almost more absurd than the car itself. The 1961 Chevrolet Corvair rampside pickup was one of those cars that seemed brilliant in a design meeting, clever in early brochures, and almost absurd in the real world. Born from Chevrolet's rear-engine air-cooled Corvair platform, the rampside was an attempt to create a truly different kind of work truck, one that could appeal to small businesses, delivery companies, and tradesmen who wanted easy cargo loading without the climb into a tall bed. The hook was right there in the name, a built-in, fold-down side ramp on the passenger side that allowed someone to roll a dolly or cart directly into the bed from street level. For tasks like loading vending machines, refrigerators, or heavy boxes, it was a neat solution. In theory. The rampside styling alone made it stand out in 1961 America. It looked less like a rugged truck and more like a boxy van with the front chopped short, thanks to its cab-over design and snub-nose front end. That was because, like the Corvair cars, it had no front-mounted engine at all. The air-cooled flat six sat in the back, underneath the bed floor. This freed up space for the ramp concept, but it also created a strange set of compromises. The ramp's intrusion into the bed meant the cargo floor wasn't a flat, deep rectangle like a conventional pickups. It was a shallow, stepped space that made hauling tall or bulky loads awkward unless you tied them down carefully. The engine hump ate up much of the rear portion of the bed, forcing you to work around it like a piece of furniture you couldn't move. And the payload was limited compared to traditional half-ton trucks. The rampside might have looked like it could carry an upright piano, but the suspension and chassis said otherwise. Then there was the infamous swing axle rear suspension, a cost-saving design carried over from the standard Corvair cars. On a light passenger car, this setup already had a reputation for tricky handling in extreme situations. On a pickup that could be loaded unevenly,
Especially with weight toward the rear, the handling could go from quirky to downright dangerous. With too much rear weight and too little in front, the front wheels could get light, steering response could get vague, and the rear could jack itself up in corners, leading to abrupt oversteer. It wasn't the sort of thing you'd want to discover while hauling a washing machine down a wet hill. By the mid-1960s, Ralph Nader's book, Unsafe at Any Speed, cemented the Corvair family's reputation as a handling hazard. And while the rampside wasn't the book's main target, guilt by association was enough to scare off buyers. Practicality was further hurt by the rampside's modest performance. The base 80-horsepower flat six was adequate for light loads and short trips, but when hauling anything substantial or climbing a grade, it strained audibly, sounding more like a lawn tractor than a truck. Even the optional 95-horsepower version couldn't disguise the fact that this was a vehicle designed more for novelty than hard labor. One small business owner in 1962 summed it up perfectly when he told a local paper, "It's great for delivering cakes, but if I put anything heavier in the back, it feels like I'm piloting a boat uphill." Chevrolet tried to market the rampside as a modern, easy-to-use alternative to the full-size pickups of the day, playing up the ramp's convenience and the cab-forward design that maximized interior space. In reality, the very buyers who might have benefited from such a feature, movers, landscapers, equipment haulers, tended to need more payload, more durability, and less fuss. For heavy-duty work, the rampside's light build, unusual handling traits, and limited cargo capacity just couldn't match a conventional pickup. It was at best a niche solution for light, oddly shaped cargo. Sales never took off, and by 1964, Chevrolet began quietly backing away from the rampside and its Corvair-based commercial siblings. By 1965, the rampside was gone entirely, replaced by more conventional truck designs. Today, the few survivors are often restored as curiosities, conversation pieces that draw crowds at shows because of their weird proportions and side-loading party trick. Owners now tend to treat them more like collector toys than working trucks, knowing full well that loading one up with gravel would be like making a house cat pull a plow. One former owner I came across in an interview from the 1990s said, "I loved the way people's eyes lit up when I dropped the ramp. But I also learned to never ever load it unevenly unless I wanted to end up parked sideways in someone's driveway." That about sums up the rampside experience. Charming, quirky, and slightly terrifying if pushed beyond its comfort zone. If you want, I can also tell you about the even stranger Corvair loadside, which looked similar but lost the ramp entirely, making you wonder why it existed at all. That one's a whole different kind of odd. The 1965 AMC Marlin was AMC's ambitious, if somewhat clumsy, attempt to dive into the mid-1960s fastback craze. A styling movement that was working wonders for Ford with the Mustang fastback and would soon give Dodge its muscular Charger. American Motors Corporation was desperate for a halo car to attract younger, style-conscious buyers. But AMC's budget and engineering resources were a fraction of the big threes. So instead of designing an all-new fastback from scratch, they took their existing Rambler Classic midsize sedan and, quite literally, stretched a fastback roofline over it. On paper, it sounded like a quick and economical way to get in on the trend. In reality, it produced one of the oddest proportions ever to roll out of an American factory. The Marlin's front end was respectable enough, with clean AMC styling cues and a reasonably balanced stance. But once your eyes reached the roofline, things got strange. The fastback was long, overly curved, and draped across the car in a way that made the rear section look swollen and heavy, like a massive whale's back rising out of the ocean. Instead of sleek and taut like a Mustang or Charger, it looked like the roof had been inflated with a bicycle pump until it threatened to burst. The rear overhang was so pronounced that it almost seemed like the car was designed to carry a dining table under glass. Critics at the time joked that it looked less like a sports fastback and more like a giant metallic fish swimming upstream against a river of better-designed competitors. AMC tried to pitch the Marlin as a personal luxury fastback, sporty but comfortable, aimed at drivers who wanted Mustang style without sacrificing rear seat space. Unfortunately, the car's Rambler Classic underpinnings and weight meant it drove more like a family sedan with a heavy hat than a true performance machine. The suspension was soft, tuned for comfort rather than agility, and while you could order a V8, including the 327 cubic inch AMC engine with 270 horsepower, it still didn't deliver the sharp, eager acceleration or handling of a Mustang GT. The steering was numbed, the brakes modest, and the automatic transmission was the choice of most buyers, further dulling any sporting pretensions. In short, it failed to satisfy either the performance crowd or the luxury market. The interior carried over much of the Rambler Classic's sensible but uninspired design, with wide bench seats available in most trims and controls that felt more like an economy sedans than a sporty GTs. The sloping fastback roofline also ate into rear headroom, negating one of AMC's selling points. In fact, the rear window was so large and steeply angled that it turned the back seats into a miniature greenhouse on sunny days, roasting passengers unless you invested in good window tinting or lived in a cloudy state. Period reviews were lukewarm at best. One automotive journalist in 1965 famously said, "The Marlin is a fine car for the person who can't decide whether to buy a sports car, a sedan, or a spaceship, and doesn't mind ending up with a little of all three." Sales reflected the public's confusion. Only around 10,000 units were sold for 1965, which might have been acceptable for a boutique Halo model, but AMC needed much stronger numbers to make the Marlin a success. By 1967, after a redesign on the Ambassador platform that made it even larger and more ungainly, the Marlin was quietly dropped. Today, the 1965 AMC Marlin occupies a strange place in classic car culture. It's not rare enough to be a high-dollar collectible, nor stylish enough to be universally loved. Instead, it's a curiosity, a reminder of AMC's willingness to take risks, even if the execution was flawed. Surviving examples often get attention at shows simply because they're so unusual, and owners tend to embrace the oddball factor. One longtime Marlin owner summed it up in a car club newsletter. "It's the only car I've owned where people come up, smile, and say, 'I've never seen one before, and I'm still not sure if I like it.' That's okay. I didn't buy it for them. I bought it because it makes me grin every time I see that whale tail in the driveway." If you'd like, I can follow this up with the even stranger 1967 Marlin story, where AMC doubled down on size and somehow made it look even more like a submarine. That one's another case of bigger is not always better. The 1970 AMC Gremlin was perhaps the most unapologetically peculiar car to ever roll out of an American factory, and its oddity wasn't the result of a whimsical design experiment. It was born out of necessity, corporate desperation, and a little bit of marketing mischief. By the late 1960s, American Motors Corporation was feeling the heat. Volkswagen's Beetle was devouring the low-cost economy car market. The Japanese were beginning to arrive with small, fuel-efficient models like the Toyota Corolla and Datsun 510. And Detroit's Big Three were slowly rolling out their own compact offerings. AMC was the smallest of the U.S. automakers, operating on a shoestring budget, and couldn't afford to take years to develop an all-new small car. They needed something now, and they needed it cheap. The solution was an engineering shortcut so audacious that it could only have come from AMC. They took the platform of their brand new 1970 Hornet Compact, ran the measuring tape 2 feet shorter at the rear, and simply chopped off the back end.
This saved time, saved money, and created a car that was smaller than almost any other American production vehicle of the era. The resulting Gremlin had a 96-inch wheelbase, almost comically short compared to most of its competitors, with the same long hood as the Hornet, but a rear end that ended abruptly in a flat hatch panel. The look was unmistakable, and to many eyes, unfinished. The front half of the Gremlin wasn't bad at all. The Hornet's upright grille, rectangular headlights, and clean fenders gave it a conventional, if somewhat conservative face. But from the B-pillar back, it was something else entirely. The roofline sloped gently and then stopped suddenly like someone had run out of paper while sketching it. The hatch was almost vertical with minimal overhang, and the rear wheel arches sat oddly close to the back bumper. Critics compared it to a shortened station wagon, a child's toy car, or, as one wag put it, a normal car that's been scared stiff and shrank in the wash. AMC knew they had something that might provoke laughter as much as admiration, so they decided to own the weirdness. The name Gremlin itself was a sly nod to mischievous creatures from folklore, the kind blamed for mechanical failures in wartime aircraft. The ads were cheeky, sometimes featuring cartoon gremlins grinning at the viewer. One particularly famous ad simply said, "If you were expecting more, you were right," with an image of the car's chopped rear profile, a wink at its truncated shape. Under the hood, AMC played it safe, with a base 128 cubic inch inline-six producing just over 100 horsepower, giving adequate but unremarkable performance. Buyers could step up to the 232 or 256 sixes, and for those who wanted to shock the unsuspecting, AMC even offered their 304 cubic inch V8. In a car weighing around 2,700 pounds, that V8 turned the Gremlin from a slow-moving curiosity into a genuine street sleeper, albeit one with questionable high-speed stability due to the short wheelbase. Inside the Gremlin was Spartan, but functional. AMC tried to distract from its humble materials with bright interior color options, ranging from vivid blue to burnt orange. The dashboard was basic, with large, clear gauges, and the optional high-back bucket seats gave a touch of sportiness. Rear passengers, however, were less fortunate. The abrupt rear design meant legroom was minimal, the seat backs were upright, and the glass hatch made it feel a bit like sitting in a display case. Cargo space was modest, and the rear opening was narrow. On the road, the Gremlin's compact size made it easy to park and maneuver in cities, but its ride quality was choppy over rough pavement, a result of the short wheelbase and simple suspension. The rear drive layout and relatively light back end could make it skittish in wet conditions, especially for inexperienced drivers. Still, it was sturdy in construction and easy to service, which appealed to budget-conscious buyers. Public reaction was split right down the middle. Some people loved its uniqueness, saw it as a fun alternative to bland imports, and appreciated its American-made simplicity. Others thought it looked like an accident and couldn't get past the styling. One former owner recalled, "I got used to the jokes, but they never stopped. Every time I stopped for gas, someone asked if the factory had run out of metal halfway through making my car." Another said, "I liked mine because nobody could mistake it for anything else. I could lose my car in a stadium parking lot unless there was another Gremlin, which never happened." Despite the mockery, AMC managed to sell over 671,000 Gremlins during its production run from 1970 to 1978, making it one of their more successful gambles. The car even had oddball special editions like the Levi's edition with denim-trimmed seats and copper rivets, which leaned fully into the 1970s kitsch factor. Today, the Gremlin has a cult following among collectors who appreciate its unapologetic weirdness, low production costs, and the fact that it dared to be different in an era of automotive conformity. The Gremlin's legacy is that it proved small cars didn't have to be bland. They could be memorable. even if people remembered them for their faults as much as their virtues. In that sense, AMC's shoebox on wheels became a success on its own terms, surviving in memory long after far more conventional cars of its era have faded into obscurity. If you like, I can go into the Levi's edition in detail, because that story is peak 1970s AMC. It's almost as strange as the car itself.
The 1974 Bricklin SV1 was one of the most ambitious, bizarre, and frustrating American sports cars ever built. A bold vision of the future that managed to be both groundbreaking and disastrous in the same breath. Conceived by entrepreneur Malcolm Bricklin, who had already made a splash and a small fortune importing Subaru 360 microcars and later Fiat X19s into the United States, the SV1, short for Safety Vehicle 1, was supposed to prove that a high-performance sports car could also be one of the safest cars in the world. It was built not in Detroit, but in New Brunswick, Canada, after Bricklin convinced the provincial government to invest millions in the project in hopes of creating a thriving auto industry there. On paper, the Bricklin sounded irresistible. The wedge-shaped body was sleek and futuristic, with sharp angles and a low stance that wouldn't have looked out of place in a science fiction movie. Its most striking feature was a pair of massive gull-wing doors, a visual flourish inspired by the Mercedes-Benz 300 SL, but here operated by pneumatic actuators instead of manual hinges. The body panels were made from acrylic resin bonded to fiberglass, which Bricklin claimed would never rust and would retain its bright colors without needing paint. Safety was built into the sales pitch. The SV1 had an integrated roll cage, energy-absorbing bumpers, and side impact protection long before such features became industry norms. Unfortunately, as so often happens with visionary projects, the devil was in the details. For starters, those gull-wing doors were an engineering nightmare. The pneumatic system that opened and closed them was painfully slow, taking nearly 12 seconds to raise, and the actuators had a nasty habit of failing entirely. When they did, the doors became immovable, a serious problem given that the side windows didn't roll down enough for a person to crawl out. More than a few owners carried a hammer inside the cabin, specifically to smash the glass in case the doors refused to open, which was often. One former owner later joked, "It was the only car where you had to break out just to get groceries." The composite body, while visually striking, was extremely difficult to manufacture consistently. The acrylic top layer would sometimes crack or develop air bubbles during production, and the panels didn't always fit flush, leading to large gaps and uneven seams. Bricklin had promised a palette of bright safety colors: safety orange, safety green, safety white, safety suntan, and safety red. But the materials meant touch-ups and repairs were a nightmare, often resulting in mismatched shades. Under the skin, the SV1 wasn't as exotic as it looked. Early 1974 models used AMC's 360 cubic inch V8 producing 220 horsepower, while later cars, 1975 onward, switched to Ford's 351 Windsor with about 175 horsepower, thanks to emissions controls. Neither engine was bad on its own, but the SV1's curb weight, around 3,500 pounds, blunted performance. Acceleration was respectable, but far from the supercar territory its styling suggested. Worse, the heavy body and less than refined suspension tuning made handling feel more like a grand tourer than a nimble sports car. Quality control bordered on non-existent. Workers in the hastily set-up Canadian factory often lacked proper training, and cars left the assembly line with rattles, electrical gremlins, leaky seals, and ill-fitting trim. Malcolm Bricklin's determination to get the car into production quickly meant problems were fixed on the fly, if at all. Some owners reported receiving cars that couldn't be driven more than a few miles before breaking down. Yet, for all its flaws, the SV1 did have a strange charisma. From a distance, parked in a driveway or on a show floor, it looked like nothing else on the road. Part American muscle car, part Italian exotic, part spaceship. It drew crowds wherever it went, and for a brief moment in the mid-1970s, it seemed like Malcolm Bricklin might just pull off his improbable dream. Reality, however, caught up quickly. Costs spiraled out of control, warranty claims piled up, and the Canadian government, having poured tens of millions into the venture, began to lose patience. By the end of 1975, after producing just under 3,000 cars, the company collapsed. Many dealers were left with unsellable stock, and parts availability quickly became a nightmare. Today, the Bricklin SV1 has a cult following among enthusiasts who appreciate its sheer audacity. Survivors are rare, and restoring one can be a wallet-draining exercise due to the scarcity of original components. Owners tell stories that are equal parts comedy and tragedy. One summed it up perfectly. When it worked, I felt like the coolest guy on earth. When it didn't, which was most of the time, I felt like an idiot who bought a spaceship with a broken door. The Bricklin's legacy is one of overreaching ambition. It was a car that dared to be different, with safety innovations that were genuinely ahead of their time, wrapped in a body that looked like a 1970s poster dream. But its execution was so flawed that SV could, as many joked, stand for seriously vexing, or perhaps some vision. It remains a fascinating cautionary tale of how good ideas can go spectacularly wrong once they leave the drawing board. If you like, I can also tell you the behind-the-scenes political drama with the Canadian government that doomed the SV1 even faster than its bad doors. It's just as wild as the car.
The 1976 Cadillac Seville Diesel stands as one of the more infamous episodes in the history of American luxury automobiles. A car that promised the refined elegance and prestige associated with the Cadillac name, while embracing the fuel economy imperatives of a turbulent era, but delivered a harsh lesson in rushed engineering and corporate hubris instead. The mid-1970s oil crises fundamentally altered the priorities of both consumers and automakers. Suddenly, fuel efficiency was king, and diesel engines, long embraced in Europe for their durability and economy, were seen by many as the logical solution for American vehicles, even luxury sedans. General Motors, eager to maintain Cadillac's relevance in a changing marketplace, opted to create a diesel-powered Seville as an alternative to the traditional gas-guzzling V8s that had defined the brand for decades. Rather than develop a clean-sheet diesel engine engineered specifically for the Seville's weight and performance expectations, GM chose a shortcut that would come back to haunt them. They took the existing 350 cubic inch Oldsmobile V8 gasoline engine, an engine designed without the stresses of diesel combustion in mind, and attempted to adapt it for diesel use. This adaptation was primarily achieved by swapping in stronger pistons and altering combustion chambers, but without redesigning the engine block, cylinder heads, or cooling system to withstand the dramatically increased cylinder pressures typical of diesel engines. The results were predictably catastrophic. The cast iron block and cylinder heads, which were perfectly fine for gasoline combustion, were inadequate to handle diesel's significantly higher compression ratio, which can be upwards of 20-to-1 compared to gasoline's roughly 9-to-1. As a result, the head gaskets, an essential sealing component between the engine block and cylinder heads, could not withstand the intense heat and pressure and often failed prematurely. The failures led to coolant leaks, overheating, and in many cases, catastrophic engine damage. It was not uncommon for owners to experience head gasket failures in as little as 15,000 to 30,000 miles, a shockingly short lifespan for what was supposed to be a premium luxury power plant. Performance-wise, the Seville diesel was a disappointment from the moment it hit the streets. The engine produced a modest 105 horsepower and 240 pound-feet of torque,
which paled compared to the smooth, powerful V8 engines Cadillac buyers expected. Weighing in at over 4,000 pounds, the Seville struggled to accelerate briskly, and the diesel engine's notorious clatter and vibrations clashed jarringly with Cadillac's usual reputation for quiet and smooth operation. Black exhaust smoke was a common sight during acceleration, a telltale sign of incomplete combustion and inefficient fuel use. The dissonance between the luxurious interior, plush leather seats, rich wood trim, and advanced features, and the rough mechanical experience made owning the diesel Seville a frustrating contradiction. Owners quickly found themselves burdened with frequent trips to the service department. Repairs were not only costly, but complex, requiring substantial labor to remove the cylinder heads and replace gaskets and other components. Many dealerships struggled to handle the influx of warranty claims, and GM was forced to extend warranties to cover the head gasket problem. But by then, the damage to Cadillac's image was severe. One particularly candid owner from the late 1970s recounted his ordeal. "I wanted a car that had the look and feel of a Cadillac, but with better mileage. What I got was a car that sounded like a diesel tractor, smoked up my driveway, and was in the shop more than it was on the road. The head gasket blew twice before I gave up. It was the most disappointing car I ever owned." GM discontinued the diesel option on the Seville by 1978 after producing roughly 14,000 units. But the legacy of the diesel Seville lingered for years. It became an object lesson in how not to introduce new technology, particularly in the luxury segment where customers expected reliability and refinement. The diesel experiment also harmed Cadillac's reputation for years, as the brand struggled to regain consumer trust while the big three competitors introduced more carefully engineered diesel models, and the European diesel market continued to thrive. Despite its notorious reputation, the 1976 Cadillac Seville diesel has become a somewhat quirky collectible today, a tangible artifact of an era marked by rapid change and automakers scrambled to adapt. For some enthusiasts, owning one is a badge of perseverance and a conversation starter, an example of how even the most prestigious brands can stumble badly when chasing new trends without adequate preparation. In hindsight, the Seville diesel represents a perfect storm of corporate urgency, underinvestment in engineering, and the challenges of translating foreign diesel success to American luxury cars. It stands as a reminder that a luxury car's promise isn't just about style or fuel economy. It's about delivering consistent, smooth, and reliable performance, something the 1976 Seville diesel was sadly incapable of providing. If you want, I can also dive deeper into how Cadillac's diesel troubles influenced the brand's approach to innovation and fuel efficiency in the decades that followed, including their cautious re-entry into diesel technology much later on.
The 1982 Cadillac Cimarron is often cited as the quintessential example of badge engineering gone terribly wrong. A car that managed to tarnish Cadillac's reputation by simply sticking a luxury badge on a vehicle that had barely changed from its humble Chevrolet Cavalier origins. It wasn't just a case of cost-cutting. It was a glaring misstep that highlighted General Motors' growing struggle to balance the prestige of its luxury brand with the economic realities of the early 1980s automotive market. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, GM was under immense pressure to produce more fuel-efficient vehicles due to rising fuel prices and tightening emissions regulations.
Cadillac, traditionally known for large, powerful, and opulent V8-powered sedans, was caught in a difficult spot: how to deliver a smaller, more economical car without abandoning the brand's image of luxury and exclusivity. The solution? Take the front-wheel drive Chevy Cavalier, a modest entry-level compact with a decidedly mainstream appeal. Slap on some faux wood trim, install leather seats, add a few chrome accents, and call it the Cimarron. From the outside, the Cimarron looked almost identical to the Cavalier, sharing the same boxy, uninspired four-door sedan body, square headlights, and simple grille. The styling was bland, lacking any unique or luxurious flair that might have justified the Cadillac badge. Inside, the Cimarron's interior was an upgraded version of the Cavalier's, with leather upholstery and slightly better materials, but the dashboard layout, controls, and even the instrumentation were largely the same as its much cheaper sibling. There was no real differentiation in the driving experience either. Power came from a small 1.8-liter inline-4 engine, producing just about 88 horsepower. Woefully inadequate for a car carrying the Cadillac name, which traditionally implied performance and refinement. Performance was sluggish at best, with a noisy engine and a transmission that felt geared toward economy rather than smoothness or power delivery. The suspension was tuned softly, resulting in vague handling and a disconnected feel from the road. Drivers who expected the kind of quiet, cushy ride Cadillac was known for were sorely disappointed. The price, however, was anything but modest. The Cimarron sticker was several $1,000s higher than the Cavalier's, leaving buyers to wonder if they were paying for a nameplate rather than a genuinely better car. Even within Cadillac's own ranks, the Cimarron was viewed as a misstep. Executives privately admitted it was a rushed project, intended primarily to fill a gap in the brand's lineup and capitalize on government fuel economy mandates. The hurried development meant corners were cut, and the end product felt more like an afterthought than a serious luxury contender. The Cimarron lacked the distinctive character and engineering excellence that had defined Cadillac for decades. Consumer reception was lukewarm to outright negative. Critics panned it as a shallow attempt to chase market trends without regard to brand integrity. Buyers who wanted a compact luxury car often looked elsewhere, towards European imports like BMW and Mercedes-Benz, which offered genuine engineering and prestige in smaller packages. Some even joked that the Cimarron was the reason Cadillac's image suffered throughout the 1980s, creating an opening for Japanese and European brands to steal market share in the luxury segment. Despite the criticism, GM continued producing the Cimarron until 1988, gradually making minor updates but never truly addressing its core shortcomings. It became a textbook example taught in automotive business courses on how not to manage brand identity. Today, the 1982 Cadillac Cimarron has a notorious reputation as one of the worst badge-engineered cars ever made, a cautionary tale about how lazy design and cost-cutting can damage even the most storied names in automotive history. Collectors and enthusiasts typically avoid it, and it rarely appears at classic car shows except as a punchline. One former Cadillac engineer once summed it up bitterly: the Cimarron wasn't a Cadillac. It was a Chevy that got a Cadillac tattoo. It cost more, but delivered less, and everyone knew it.
The 1989 Chrysler TC by Maserati is one of those fascinating footnotes in automotive history, where ambition, marketing, and corporate collaboration collided in a way that ultimately left everyone a little disappointed. The TC was Chrysler's attempt to capture some of the Italian flair and cachet of Maserati, while offering American buyers a stylish, small, luxury roadster with European pedigree. The idea was promising on paper, but the execution fell frustratingly short. The origins of the TC, short for Turismo Coupe, trace back to the mid-1980s, when Chrysler sought to diversify its lineup with a niche luxury sports car to compete with European imports like the BMW 3 Series convertible and the Mercedes SL. The company partnered with Maserati, the storied Italian brand famous for its exotic supercars and racing heritage, to lend the project a dose of European sophistication and style. Chrysler's plan was to ship components, primarily from the Chrysler LeBaron coupe, over to Maserati's factory in Modena, Italy, where the cars would be assembled by hand, combining American engineering with Italian craftsmanship. On the surface, the TC had some appealing features. It sported a Targa-style roof panel that could be removed to create an open-air experience without the full complexity of a convertible mechanism. Its design was a clean, understated blend of Chrysler's 1980s styling cues mixed with subtle Italian influences, including unique front and rear fascias, quad headlights, and a grille with the iconic Maserati Trident badge. The interior was upgraded with leather upholstery, wood trim, and a richer level of standard equipment compared to the base LeBaron, aiming to justify its premium price tag. But the promise ended there. Mechanically, the TC was largely unchanged from the LeBaron it was based on. Under the hood sat Chrysler's familiar 2.2-liter turbocharged four-cylinder engine, producing about 160 horsepower, which was a respectable figure for the time, but hardly exhilarating in a car carrying a Maserati badge and a hefty price approaching $30,000. The suspension and chassis were essentially borrowed from the front-wheel drive LeBaron coupe, resulting in handling that was competent but uninspired and lacked the sharpness expected of a true sports car. The transmission was a sluggish 4-speed automatic with a 5-speed manual offered only late in the run, limiting driver engagement. Adding to the challenges was the TC's troubled development timeline. Originally planned for a mid-1980s launch, delays pushed its arrival to 1989, by which point the market for small luxury roadsters was crowded and expectations had risen. By then, the TC's blend of American parts and Italian assembly felt more like a marketing gimmick than a serious sports car contender. Critics and buyers alike found its styling bland and unremarkable, failing to capture the Italian exoticism Maserati was known for. And the Maserati badge on the grille was often met with skepticism rather than admiration. Price was another stumbling block. The TC carried a premium over comparable American coupes, but didn't offer the performance or cachet to justify it. Buyers who wanted Italian luxury often preferred Maserati's own high-performance models or European rivals, while those looking for American luxury sports cars saw better value elsewhere. The TC's identity crisis, an Italian-American hybrid that was neither truly Italian nor fully American, left it caught in no man's land. The Chrysler-Maserati partnership also strained under the weight of corporate and financial challenges. Maserati itself was struggling financially and would soon be acquired by Fiat, further complicating the project's future. Production lasted only from 1989 to 1991, with fewer than 7,000 units built in total. The TC failed to ignite enthusiasm or significantly boost Chrysler's luxury image. Today, the Chrysler TC by Maserati is often remembered as a curious, somewhat awkward collaboration. A car with a beautiful pedigree on paper, but a compromised design that satisfied no one. It's a collectible in small circles, appreciated more for its unusual backstory than for any driving thrills. One owner summed it up dryly, "It's a nice car if you want something rare with a Maserati badge, but don't expect to outrun anything or impress anyone at a car meet." If you like, I can also share some interesting anecdotes about how the TC's quirky development process mirrored broader challenges Chrysler faced in the late 80s and early 1990s, a time when the company was experimenting with partnerships and trying to reinvent itself amid a tough automotive landscape. The 2001 Pontiac Aztec is widely remembered not just as a car, but as a cultural phenomenon, a striking example of how automotive design and marketing can misfire spectacularly, creating a vehicle that's both fascinating and frustrating in equal measure. It's the kind of car that the moment you see it instantly sparks strong opinions, love it, hate it, or just marvel at its sheer oddity. But beyond the jokes and memes, the Aztec story reveals a lot about the pressures and ambitions automakers faced at the turn of the millennium, especially as the SUV craze was reaching a fever pitch. Pontiac conceived the Aztec during the late 1990s, when sport utility vehicles were booming in America. The market was exploding, with buyers wanting vehicles that combined the ruggedness of off-road trucks with the comfort and style of passenger cars. GM's designers and marketers wanted the Aztec to be the ultimate lifestyle vehicle for young, adventurous buyers who saw their cars as extensions of their outdoor hobbies. Camping, biking, hiking, fishing, you name it. It wasn't just a transportation device. It was supposed to be a gear-hauling, tent-towing, adventure-enabling mobile base camp. The Aztec was packed with genuinely clever features that demonstrated forward-thinking design. For example, it had a built-in cooler integrated into the center console, perfect for keeping drinks cold on long trips. The rear cargo area included a modular tent system that could be set up off the back of the vehicle, effectively turning the Aztec into a mini camper without needing a separate trailer or tent. The rear seats folded flat or could be removed entirely to create an enormous cargo space that easily accommodated bikes, kayaks, or even a small motorcycle. The roof rack was sturdy and designed to handle heavy loads, while the overall chassis and suspension delivered a surprisingly comfortable ride for a vehicle aimed at active outdoor use. Under the hood, the Aztec featured GM's familiar 3.4-liter V6 engine, producing around 185 horsepower. Paired with a 4-speed automatic transmission and optional all-wheel drive, the powertrain was competent, though not thrilling. It was enough to propel the nearly 4,000-pound vehicle with decent confidence, but not much more. Fuel economy was average for its class, hovering in the low 20s miles per gallon, which was acceptable for an SUV of that size and era. The problem, of course, was the Aztec's styling, or more accurately, its complete lack of harmonious styling. The exterior was a chaotic blend of sharp angles, oversized plastic cladding, and mismatched body panels that seemed to have been designed by committee without a clear guiding vision. The front fascia featured a split grille and headlights that looked disconnected, as if they belonged to different vehicles. The plastic moldings ran along the wheel arches and doors, creating a bulky, armored look that some found aggressive, but most found awkward and unattractive. The rear end was the most infamous feature, a high, squared-off tail that ended abruptly, resembling a hunchback, and with taillights placed oddly, disrupting any sense of flow. The overall effect was a vehicle that looked as if it had been assembled from spare parts without regard for aesthetic cohesion. This disjointed appearance made the Aztec an easy target for critics and comedians alike. Automotive reviewers labeled it ugly, awkward, and even monstrous. Its shape was frequently compared to a Franken-car, a melted Lego block, or an overgrown plastic toy. Sales suffered accordingly. Despite Pontiac's marketing efforts, emphasizing the Aztec's versatility and lifestyle appeal, the majority of buyers simply didn't want to be seen driving a vehicle that looked so unusual and polarizing. Marketing tried to lean into the Aztec's different image, pitching it as a vehicle for people who didn't want to blend in. However, the reality was that most consumers wanted an SUV that was rugged, but also stylish and respectable, something they could proudly park in front of their home or drive to work without embarrassment. The Aztec failed to hit that balance. Its unique place in pop culture was cemented years later when it became the iconic car driven by Walter White, the lead character in the groundbreaking TV series Breaking Bad. The show used the Aztec to symbolize Walter's initial mediocrity, economic struggle, and eventual transformation.
This visibility gave the Aztec a second life as a cult classic, with fans embracing its quirks and odd charm in a way that the general public never did during its original run. Owner testimonials reflect this dichotomy. Many drivers appreciated the Aztec's practicality, roomy interior, and surprising comfort for long road trips or hauling gear. One owner shared, "The Aztec was perfect for camping trips. It had all the space and utility you could want, and the tent was a real game changer. I loved that aspect, even if the looks turned heads for the wrong reasons." Others admitted the styling was a constant source of teasing and sometimes personal embarrassment, but still praised the vehicle for its reliability and usefulness. From an engineering standpoint, the Aztec was built on GM's Theta platform, which was also used for the more conventional Pontiac Torrent and Chevy Equinox models in later years. The lessons learned from the Aztec's chassis and drivetrain helped GM refine their crossover designs, leading to more successful and better received vehicles. It could be argued that the Aztec was ahead of its time in terms of integrating lifestyle features into an SUV package, but it was handicapped by its styling and poor public reception. The Pontiac Aztec story serves as a stark example of how important cohesive design and brand identity are in the automotive world. No matter how innovative or practical a vehicle is, if it fails to resonate visually and emotionally with consumers, it's unlikely to succeed. It also highlights how market pressures and internal corporate challenges can lead to compromises that harm even the most promising projects. In summary, the 2001 Pontiac Aztec was a vehicle bursting with innovative ideas and practical features that ultimately couldn't overcome its controversial styling and timing. It is now remembered not only as one of the most unattractive vehicles ever produced, but also as a cult classic with a devoted following, thanks in part to its unlikely role in pop culture history. If you want, I can also explore how Pontiac's design process for the Aztec unfolded, including the internal debates and the role of focus groups that oddly loved its oddity, or how GM's approach to crossovers evolved after the Aztec's commercial failure.
The 2004 Chevrolet SSR Supersport Roadster stands as one of the boldest, most curious experiments in GM's recent history. A car that tried to blend the nostalgia of classic hot rods with the practicality of a pickup truck, but ended up as a puzzling oddity that struggled to find a genuine audience. GM's idea was to capture the retro-cool vibe that was sweeping the automotive world in the early 2000s, inspired by the success of vehicles like the PT Cruiser and the Ford Thunderbird Revival, but combine it with the pickup's ruggedness and versatility. The result? Something that looked undeniably cool in concept, but was riddled with compromises in reality. From the outside, the SSR's design was unmistakable, a swooping, bulbous shape dripping with 40s-style styling cues, including flared fenders, running boards, and a rounded front grille. It was a head-turner, and many admired its bold, unapologetic throwback looks. But beneath the nostalgic exterior, the SSR was essentially built on the same platform as GM's mid-size pickups and SUVs, which contributed to its heft and, ultimately, its undoing. Weighing in at over 4,800 pounds, the SSR was hardly light or nimble. Under the hood was initially a 5.3-liter V8, producing around 300 horsepower, later upgraded to a 6.0-liter LS2 V8 with 390 horsepower in later models. While those numbers sound impressive on paper, the SSR's substantial weight and tall truck-like chassis meant acceleration was leisurely at best. 0 to 60 miles per hour times hovered around 6 seconds, which was slow compared to contemporary sports cars and even some muscle cars. The transmission was a 4-speed automatic, further limiting the SSR's sporty appeal. The truck bed, which many buyers hoped would offer genuine utility, was a major letdown. It was small, shallow, and cramped, barely able to hold a couple of suitcases or a small cooler, let alone bulky cargo. This undercut the pickup promise and left traditional truck enthusiasts unimpressed. Meanwhile, the heavy body and soft suspension compromised handling and ride quality, making the SSR feel more like a cruiser than a performance vehicle. This created a frustrating identity crisis. The SSR was too heavy and cumbersome to satisfy sports car enthusiasts craving agility and speed, but too impractical and cramped to appeal to pickup truck buyers looking for utility. It was a vehicle caught between worlds, never fully committing to either role. On top of that, the price was steep. Early SSRs came with a starting MSRP around $42,000, putting it in competition with more performance-focused cars and premium convertibles that delivered better driving dynamics. Many potential buyers found the SSR's looks appealing, but balked at the compromises in performance and practicality. GM produced the SSR from 2003 to 2006, with roughly 24,000 units made, including a handful of special editions and performance upgrades. Despite a loyal niche following of enthusiasts who loved its retro style and open-air fun, the SSR never came close to becoming a mass-market success. Owner reactions were mixed, but often affectionate in a love-it-despite-its-flaws kind of way. One longtime SSR owner commented, "Sure, it's not a fast sports car or a serious truck, but it's unique, and when you're cruising with the top down, people can't stop staring. It's a blast on sunny days, even if it doesn't make much sense on paper." Critics, however, were less forgiving. Many called the SSR a gimmick, questioning why GM tried to mix incompatible concepts in one vehicle. It was seen as an indulgent passion project rather than a serious contender, a why car from day one. Intriguing, but flawed. In retrospect, the SSR represents a fascinating snapshot of early 2000s automotive culture, when nostalgia was a powerful selling point, but practicality and performance still mattered most. Its bold styling and unique concept make it memorable, but its compromises ultimately limited its appeal. If you want, I can also dive into how the SSR's engineering borrowed heavily from GM's truck platforms and why that was both a blessing and a curse, or explore some of the rare special editions that tried to spice up the lineup.